Have you ever felt like you were just existing? Like every day is just a repetition of the one before, without a clear purpose? Maybe at some point, everything that once made sense started to fall apart. The certainties became doubts, and the answers that used to be enough no longer satisfied you. And then, that feeling creeps in. Hard to describe, but impossible to ignore. It's like something inside you is constantly asking, why am I here? What's the purpose of my life? If these questions have ever crossed your mind, you're not alone. This is one of the deepest crises a person can face. And it was exactly this crisis that tormented one of the greatest writers of all time, Leo Tolstoy. Tolstoy had everything a person could dream of: fame, wealth, a loving family, and worldwide recognition. Yet at 50 years old, an overwhelming emptiness took over his life. He began to wonder if any of it truly mattered. Dark thoughts started to consume him. If nothing has meaning, why keep going? If this seems like an impossible question, perhaps the answer Tolstoy found will surprise you. In the depths of his despair, he discovered something that completely changed his perspective on life. And it just might change yours too. Leo Tolstoy wasn't just a brilliant writer. He was one of the most respected men of his time. The author of War and Peace and Anna Karenina, he had achieved everything: prestige, wealth, and worldwide recognition. He owned a vast estate, had a large family, and was loved by his wife. From the outside, his life seemed perfect, but on the inside, something was falling apart. At 50, he began to realize that none of his achievements truly satisfied him. He had everything society deemed essential for happiness, yet he felt an increasing emptiness. He kept asking himself, if I've reached the peak of success, why do I feel so lost? This feeling wasn't unique to him. Studies from the University of Warwick suggest that happiness follows a U-shaped curve, hitting a low point in middle age. Many successful people report a similar experience: a sudden loss of meaning, a crisis of identity that seems to have no explanation. But for Tolstoy, this crisis went beyond the ordinary. It became something much darker. What happens when even happiness loses its meaning? Tolstoy was about to find out. The emptiness inside Tolstoy grew stronger each day. What once felt like a minor discomfort turned into constant torment. He could no longer escape the question that echoed in his mind. If everything ends, what's the point of continuing? His crisis became so overwhelming that he started considering the worst. In a confession, he described how he hid ropes and avoided firearms, afraid he might act on his darkest thoughts. To him, life seemed like a cruel joke. If all accomplishments, love, and effort would eventually be erased by death, why keep playing this game? Years later, Albert Camus would call this the only serious philosophical question: deciding whether life is worth living. Tolstoy was trapped in this dilemma. His thoughts followed a cold, ruthless logic. If not today, then tomorrow. If not tomorrow, then in 30 years. Does it make any difference? Nihilism had consumed his mind. He felt there was no escape. But before giving in, Tolstoy made a decision that changed everything. He would embark on a desperate search for meaning. Tolstoy refused to accept that life was just a meaningless cycle. If an answer existed, he had to find it. So, he immersed himself in everything that might offer meaning: philosophy, science, and religion. But the deeper he searched, the stronger his anguish became. He first turned to philosophy. He read Socrates, Schopenhauer, and Nietzsche. But instead of finding comfort, he found more doubts. Schopenhauer saw life as an endless struggle, driven by desires that could never be satisfied. Nietzsche declared that God is dead, and that humans must create their own meaning. But Tolstoy couldn't accept this idea. Science didn't bring relief either. Darwinism described life as a mechanical process of evolution, with survival as its only purpose. Under this logic, humans were nothing more than temporary organisms, existing briefly before fading into oblivion. Modern neuroscience research, such as Emily Esfahani Smith studies, confirms that without purpose, the human mind struggles with anxiety and depression. Tolstoy was experiencing this firsthand. Religion seemed like the last option. But how could a lifelong skeptic suddenly embrace faith? And what if faith was just an illusion, a comforting lie? Tolstoy wanted to believe, but his rational mind resisted. He needed something more. The answer that would change everything came from an unexpected place. A simple parable. In the depths of his crisis, Tolstoy came across a parable that changed his view on life. It told the story of a man fleeing from a wild beast. In his desperation, he fell into an abandoned well. Below him, a dragon lay waiting with its mouth wide open. Clinging to a fragile branch, he struggled to hold on. As he dangled between the two dangers, he noticed tiny drops of honey dripping from the leaves above. Despite his fear, he reached out, tasting the sweetness, momentarily forgetting his inevitable fate. To Tolstoy, this parable was a perfect metaphor for human existence. The wild beast represented the struggles of life, the dragon symbolized death, and the drops of honey, the fleeting pleasures that distract us but don't change reality. He began to wonder, are we all just clinging to illusions, pretending the dragon isn't waiting below? Are we simply chasing distractions to avoid confronting the truth? Modern research shows that excessive entertainment consumption is directly linked to rising anxiety levels. But ignoring the problem wasn't a real solution. Tolstoy wanted something more than temporary escapes. He needed a real answer. Tolstoy realized that when faced with the absurdity of life, people typically followed four paths. The first group simply ignored the problem. They lived without questioning the meaning of life, focusing on daily routines, work, and entertainment. But Tolstoy wondered, how long can someone avoid this question? The second group sought escape through pleasure. They chased wealth, status, relationships, and distractions to fill the void. However, Tolstoy had already experienced all of this and knew that pleasure was temporary. The feeling of emptiness always returned. The third group saw nihilism as a dead end and believed that the only solution was to end their lives. Tolstoy himself had come dangerously close to this path, but realized it didn't provide real answers. Death wasn't a solution. It was just the end of questioning. The fourth group, according to Tolstoy, was made up of those who recognized life's meaninglessness but felt powerless to act. They knew existence was full of suffering, that death was inevitable, and that no inherent purpose existed. Yet they lacked the energy or will to do anything about it. They weren't truly living, but they weren't choosing to die either. None of these paths seemed like the right one. If ignoring the problem, chasing pleasure, or giving up weren't real solutions, then what was? Tolstoy found the answer in an unexpected place. Among the simplest people he had ever met, Tolstoy began observing the people around him. He had searched for answers in philosophy, science, and organized religion. But surprisingly, it was among the peasants that he found something unexpected. Despite their harsh conditions, poverty, and suffering, these people seemed to have an unshakable sense of purpose. They worked hard, cared for their families, and lived their lives without constantly questioning existence. What kept them going? The answer was faith. They believed that life had meaning beyond what the eye could see. While Tolstoy tried to solve everything through logic, the peasants lived with a certainty that required no complex theories. Studies from the American Psychological Association show that people with strong spiritual beliefs tend to be more resilient in difficult times. Faith, regardless of its form, provides a psychological structure that helps people cope with despair. Tolstoy realized that maybe the answer wasn't in reason, but in accepting something the human mind couldn't fully grasp. But how could someone who had been skeptical his entire life suddenly embrace faith? He would have to take a step further. Tolstoy saw that faith gave the peasants a sense of purpose that he lacked. But there was a problem. He never trusted the church. To him, religious institutions were filled with corruption, empty rituals, and political interests. How could he accept faith without submitting to something he considered false? He decided to seek God on his own terms. He rejected the dogmas imposed by the Russian Orthodox Church and turned to the purest teachings of Christianity. What truly mattered in Jesus' message? He found the answer in the Sermon on the Mount. To Tolstoy, these words were different from everything else he had read. They weren't rigid rules, but a call to live with humility, compassion, and detachment from materialism. He realized that faith didn't need to be blind or confined to institutions. It could be lived authentically, through simplicity. This explained why the peasants found peace. They didn't need deep philosophical theories. They just trusted. Tolstoy, a man who had spent decades trying to understand the world through logic, was now facing something beyond reason. And this realization would completely transform his life. Tolstoy's transformation was radical. He abandoned his aristocratic life, chose simplicity, and began sharing his newfound vision with the world. His writings no longer just reflected grand stories. They became a window into his search for meaning. But this change wasn't accepted by everyone. His family, especially his wife, couldn't understand why he wanted to renounce everything. Conflicts between them grew, and Tolstoy's last years were filled with inner turmoil between his new faith and the attachments of the past. At 82, he made the decision to leave. On a cold night, he secretly left his estate, seeking an even simpler life. But his health had already deteriorated, and days later he passed away in a small train station, far from everything he had once owned. His legacy, however, remained. He showed that in the face of existential emptiness, there are paths to be explored. Not everyone will find the answer in faith, but everyone, at some point, must face the question that haunted Tolstoy. What is the meaning of life? Perhaps the answer isn't in reason or fleeting pleasures. Maybe it's in how we choose to live, no matter what awaits us at the end. And what about you? How do you confront the absurdity of life?